No, okay. All right. You know about this one, right? Yeah.
I do.
Right, okay. Okay, can I be heard?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, before we begin tonight, just one shameless plug. As some of you may know, I'm editor at Yucatán Magazine, and along with our director, Lee Steele, and Jessica Benitez, and a lot of other very talented people, we put together this magazine, and we have our current issue as well as several back issues for sale over there at the table next to lovely Jessica. So, yeah, please make sure to peruse. Okay, well, I think it might be time to change that photo, but anyway, what you gonna do? Anyway, okay, so our topic for tonight is pretty broad, and we're not going to be able to get into a lot of super specific things, right? But we're going to be looking at, in broad strokes, at the practice of human sacrifice in ancient Mesoamerica as well as the ancient Mideast, right? One of the things I do is I'm also tour guide, fourth generation. Yes, my father and grandfather and great-grandfather, my dad's right here. You know, one of the things that always comes up when we're on these tours are questions about human sacrifice, and sometimes when we're standing right in the middle of the sun, it's kind of hard to go into real depth about it, so I thought this might be an opportunity, and also an opportunity to contrast and compare this practice in Mesoamerica, not just in the Maya world, but in Mesoamerica more broadly, with similar practices in the ancient Near East. So, disclaimer here, I have no agenda. This is not trying to offend anyone of any faith, these are just all facts. I have my citations here and everything, and yeah, I like Pontius Pilate washing my hands, right? Yeah, so you've been told. Okay, so we have a really big questions here, right? So why would anybody ever sacrifice another human being rationally, right? I mean, if we're parting from the idea that these people are not just, you know, crazy, bloodthirsty people, then they must have good reasons to do what they do. So I'm going to present some different scenarios and specific cases under which this practice was, well, practiced. Okay, so what are our sources, right? So we're not just making stuff up. Where are we getting this information? So in Mesoamerica, we have mostly codexes, stelas, stelae, reliefs, murals like those we find in Mochica and Bonampak, first-hand accounts by very early European travelers, myth and oral tradition. In the ancient Near East, we have, of course, the Bible, different texts in Greek, Coptic, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, different artworks, also biblical denunciations, and myth and oral tradition as well, right? So we're not really going to go that much into the case of Egypt, although there is, of course, a strong influence that they exert on the ancient Near East. But most of the sacrifice that we talk about in the context of Egypt has to do with retainer sacrifice, which is, of course, this idea of, you know, the pharaoh has a cohort through his entire life, so it would not be dignified to go to the other world all by his lonesome, right? He needs his retainers and his favorite cats and all that, you know. If not, yeah, that would just not be dignified. So that's just to poke our head a little bit there into this practice with Egypt. You could also think that there might be tied up with a practice that, I don't know, maybe the pharaoh wasn't, can people hear me in the back? Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Maybe the pharaoh, you know, needs a little bolstering. Legitimacy by acclaim was a very big thing in the ancient world. So to have some people there to back up, how good you were and how you don't deserve to be, thrown into the mouth of the beast and cease to exist in Egyptian cosmology is maybe a good thing. Okay, so here we're going to look at a very famous and controversial case, and it has to do with Jephthah, who makes who makes a promise to Yahweh, to the God of the Israelites, that if victorious in battle, he will sacrifice the first person that he sees when he returns back home, right? And the person who receives him is his daughter, right? Now, he's not happy to sacrifice her, but does what God commands. And the sacrifice does take place, and this is, in the book of Judges, you can look it up. There's a few similar accounts we will speak of. There's, of course, parallels with the binding of Isaac, right? And as it turns out, in very early versions of the story, Isaac doesn't come down from the mountain, right? So there's an implication that the story has been sanitized over time, given how important the figures involved in this story are, right? So having, the father of the great Abrahamic religions having, committed, human sacrifice and that of his child is, pretty touchy stuff. Okay, so then we also know from this practice in Mesoamerica, especially amongst Nawa-speaking peoples, and the Mexica in particular, where a noble youth would be raised in luxury and undergo a form of apotheosis, which of course means to become a god, in Greek. And this youth would become a god and then be sacrificed, right? As if he were the literal incarnation of a deity on earth, usually Huitzilopochtli, right? So this was also to have victory in war, right? So we have, give me victory in war, give me victory in war, okay? One was premeditated, I guess, the other was not, but still we have a very similar result. And even tougher than just, normal sacrifice is, of course, the sacrifice of children, which in the Old Testament we know was not exactly common, but there was this deity known as Molech who had babies sacrificed to him. And we mostly know about this through Leviticus, where Yahweh is condemning the practice, but in condemning the practice, we're of course understanding that it is taking place. We can remember the first commandment, right? You shall worship no gods other than I. What does that imply? Well, there's other gods, and Molech is one of them. Another figure that comes up a lot when we're talking about Molech is, darn it, what am I blanking right now? Okay, sorry? It almost sounded like somebody had the answer there, and my iPad for my notes are covered up. Baal, right? So we hear a lot about Baal sacrifices, but Baal is sometimes interpreted as a deity, but what Baal just means is Lord, right? So sometimes even in the Old Testament we have Baal used interchangeably with Jehovah or Yahweh or whatever it happens to be, because we have no syllables, only consonants. Okay, so then of course here we also have the case of the king Moab, of a Semitic people, of the Pharisees, who gives his firstborn and son as a burnt offering during a temple sacrifice. When asked, what we should do, he says, "Shall I give my firstborn son to the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" And he responded to the phrase, "He has shown all you people what is good, and what does Yahweh require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and walk humbly with your God." Right? So then again, we see these parables with Isaac. So difficult stuff. Okay, so now jumping over a bit more to the Mesoamerican side of things, we do know sacrifice and human sacrifice took place in Mesoamerica. Here in the Well of Sacrifices in Chichen Itza, bodies of bound children have been found, as well as those of adults. And it's just, one of the many things that have been found within the Well of Sacrifice, as well as artifacts from, as far north as the southern United States and far south as northern South America. So definitely there were sacrifices going on here, clearly. The second scenario has to do with captives of war, right? So here, of course, this is from myth, but we have here the Trojan, the hero. I didn't write who it was. It's Ajax sacrificing a Trojan for the glory of Zeus, and it's the figure over here is Charon, who is the boatman of the underworld. I'm sure a lot of you know. And so we see this in myth, but then these stories come down to us, and for example, in media, in TV, if anybody saw, for example, that TV show Game of Thrones, there was a very crazy episode where one of the pretenders to the throne does basically the same thing and sacrifices. He sacrifices a daughter, right? Okay, so everybody should probably recognize this image here from the ball court in Chichen Itza. It's an illustration that repeats, a panel, right, of these are the captains of the two different teams playing the Mesoamerican ball game or ceremony, depending on how you take it and interpret it. And we can see here one person on his knees over here with blood represented as serpents coming out, and then the captain of the other team holding the human head. So very clearly as a result of the sacrifice that came after. I'm always asked, Carlos, I've had people tell me with absolute certainty that it was the victors team that got sacrificed. And I've also heard the opposite said with just as much conviction. So which is it? And the truth here is that we have to be humble because we simply don't know. We don't have primary sources to tell us exactly. But one thing that's very important to keep in mind is that this ball game, right, that does involve ritual sacrifice, is not a Maya, is not even a Mesoamerican, but is an American phenomena that is not standard, right? There's no standard size for the ball court. There's no standard size even for the markers in Copan in Honduras. There are no rings. The ball was hit against the head of these macaws. So there's a lot of variation. So the earliest ball court that's been found was found in Oaxaca, dating to 1374 BCE. It's the earliest one that we know of. And this went on until the post-classic period, right? So very close to contact with Europeans. So we're talking thousands of years from all the way from the southern United States to the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, right? So it's a very large geography and a lot of time. So, people are going to do things different ways in different times and places. And I think this is one of the things I want you to take away from this, right? There's no standard idea. Scenario 3 of why a rational person who believes in a god or gods would undergo something so terrible as a sacrifice. Well, according to the Mexica, we see that Huatzli was engaged in a constant battle between the forces of good and evil. We hear about this. And basically, this offering that has been very popularized in the media of having the heart extracted was for this very specific purpose, right? Now, a lot has been made about how frequent these kinds of sacrifices were, along with also the previous example of the apotheosis of a youth. And really, archaeological evidence suggests that really it was not nearly as high as the media likes to depict, or we sometimes in our imaginations like to believe. So we really have to be careful about that when we're thinking about it ourselves, because the information is really not that rock solid. So here we have another parallel, which is the attempted sacrifice of Andromeda, because their mother Cassiopeia boasted that she was more beautiful than the Nereids, and who are, of course, daughters of Poseidon, who then started to wreak havoc on the city, but of course she was saved by Perseus. So another example of keeping the forces of nature at bay. So here, when we talk about this sacrifice to keep the sun in the sky, that's a bit of a oversimplification. It has to do, yes, with the sun, but it also has to do with having regular seasons. The rains come when they're supposed to come. Yes, literally keeping the sun in the sky according to some sources, but it's part of an entire cosmology, right? And these sacrifices are also performed, we do know, according to very specific sacrificial calendars, right? So they're not just being done willy-nilly for the heck of it at whatever time. We also have reason to believe that in a lot of cases, even captives of war were spared. So we know that, for example, the last city-state that the Aztec or the Triple Alliance took down was the city of Cholula, right? So what they did there is that they did something similar to what the Romans used to call decimation, which was 1 in every 10 adult males. And then they would have to fight it out through a process, but then almost all of them, even of those, would be allowed to go back home, keep working the fields, and keep paying taxes back to Tenochtitlan, right? Because if you're just, sacrificing your strongest and your best, or your young girls who are going to, allow for the next generation, this does not seem like a very smart way to keep a complex society going, right? But what is it with this obsession over the skull and death imagery in Mesoamerica? Some of you perhaps remember a time when some Mesoamerican peoples, chiefly the Maya, were kind of pictured in the public imagination as kind of these very kind of like noble savages, right? The Aztecs were the bad guys. The Maya weren't really being involved in war. They weren't, they were different. And then with the publication of, the photographs of the murals of Yaxchilan and Bonampak, and other discoveries, such as the ones in Molchique and the murals in Chichen Itza, we see that this is not accurate, right? They also engaged in war. And it basically comes down to a narrative where these practices from which our world religions come, right? You have these very scary, not very palatable aspects being played down, while especially during the conquest, all these narratives are really pumped up to the max, right? And and yes, there was ritual sacrifice. We see here a picture of a sompantli with actual human skulls in it, which is right behind where the Templo Mayor is, behind on Avenida Guatemala in Mexico City. Here we have a pictographical representation of it, and here we have the Lord of the Underworld, Puch, right? But another way of thinking about this or imagining it has to do with, here in Mexico, we have like this cliche that people say, right? En Mexico no le tenemos miedo a la muerte. In Mexico, we're not afraid of death, right? Which is, well, not true for starters, but I've heard this on a lot of occasions, and it's kind of come through to me, that we do have this kind of cultural notion because we are such a polarized society, economically, politically, socially, in so many different ways. But at the end, right, this is all we really are these skulls. And whether you're, Vladimir Putin or a beggar on the streets in Palestine, at the end of the day, that's what we are reduced to. So it's really quite a democratic symbol in that way. And in Mexican folklore, in contemporary times, that is a lot of the way the spirit is taken. But meanwhile, in Europe, if any of you have been to Kutna Hora in the Czech Republic, how about a chandelier made out of nothing but pelvises? Lovely. We have all this bone imagery as well as in Paris, and illustrations of the medieval practice of putting heads on spikes, not looking that different from a sompantli. Really, it's really, the same idea, just lacking the kind of neat architecture that goes around the latter instead of the former, right? So this is an image here from Scandinavia, and of course we have here the death of Romulus, the hand of Remus, which of course is not actually a historical event, but is by many Roman historians kind of considered as like the kind of sacrificial beginnings of Rome. And it's odd that you would include something like that, right? Because if you're the person that's actually like writing this history, why would you start with such an embarrassing account of how your civilization started, right? We see this in a lot of cultures around the world. And then on the other side here, we have a scene from 10th century Scandinavia, where they're also engaging in this type of ritual sacrifice. So again, what I'm trying to get to here, and what I think is really important, is to get through this notion that when human sacrifice does happen, and this is backed up by the archaeological record, right? It seems to be for very specific reasons and for good reasons, kind of regardless of whatever the culture it is that you're talking about. Now, is it possible that you would have something like human sacrifice weaponized? Absolutely. And did it happen? Well, I don't have the primary source, but there's no reason to believe not, right? I mean, it's something that you could very easily weaponize against your enemies, and yeah, it's just pretty much that simple. So really, these narratives of making less of it and kind of blowing it up really kind of serve this function, right? So it's always important to look at it with an eye towards the empirical evidence and yeah. And so, like, people ask me this also very commonly when we're out on tours, right? And I'm talking about similarities between sacrifice or pyramids in this place and pyramids in that place. And people say, Carlos, I mean, isn't it a coincidence that there's like ziggurats in Iraq and pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in Mexico, and there are all these pyramids, right? And now we say, well, there's only so many ways to solve a problem, right? In the case of a Stone Age civilization, it is to build a pyramid. If you want to build really big, it's really the only way you can. And in biology, there's a very similar concept, which is convergent evolution. So these two species of birds, which we see one right next to another, to a non-expert, if we saw these, we're not ornithologists. Anybody here an ornithologist? Like an actual ornithologist? Okay, probably not. You know, you see these two birds in your backyard, and you say, oh, that's the same bird, except for, you know, this one evolved in the American continent, and this one in Africa. And they're completely different birds. They cannot reproduce with each other. They're completely different species. So given similar constraints and similar environments and spans of time, you're going to end up with similar results. And this human sacrifice thing is all a thing of the past, right? Of course, the death penalty we do entirely because it is a deterrent, not because we feel anger towards aggressors and want to make them suffer as a society. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic there. We have people, including children, working really terrible jobs that put their life at risk so that we can keep our lifestyle, and of course also fight our wars. And you know, so I venture to say that human sacrifice is alive and well today. So again, with the biblical references and with the references from different codexes and different practices, I'm not trying to put one above the other or make a bigger or smaller deal. I'm just kind of trying to make this very brief analysis, comparing one and the other. Now, there's always outlier cases, right? Somebody can very easily raise their hand, and yes, in El Tajín, there was like something like 200 bodies found beneath a platform, and they had all been bound, and it looks like they had all been executed in a ritual manner at about the same time. To that, again, I would say, man, we have a span of thousands of years, right? Same thing comes with political systems, right? Like people ask me, what was Mesoamerican society like? And you have to answer, well, where and when, right? In some places, matriarchies, right? In some places, just straight up, patrilineal dynasties. In some places, like Chichen Itza, at least during some periods of time in history, we have reasons to believe there were even like these councils of old wise men, between 7 and 12 of them in different periods of time. So you really have to take everything into context and not try to just reduce these very big and complex ideas down to just one tiny point. Okay, well, we kind of blew through that. I talk quick and fast. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Since I'm in the back, I'll stand up. This is a subject that I've been intrigued with for many, many years as well. Could you comment on, there are those, such as René Girard, the French-American anthropologist, who believe that there has been progress in our religions because Judaism and Christianity did put an end to human sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And they really did. It's historically well documented, even in the Old Testament. So, would you react to that? You nodded. I think you know René Girard's.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think of his analysis that way?
Well, what I would say to that is that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and the firstborns in all of Egypt and their animals died. And that's in the Old Testament. There's a number of other instances I'm sure you're familiar with either Yahweh meting out divine justice on peoples that were not the chosen people. And we have, of course, the example of Christ's human sacrifice, regardless of what we believe theologically about that. And, well, yes, institutionally, this was phased out. Even in the year 1000 BCE, we have these denunciations against human sacrifice that were being undergone by Semitic peoples, that Semitic peoples were doing. So, yes, institutionally you do have this, and it is kind of on the fringe, but did it ever really go away? No, I think that'd be kind of too strong a claim. I'm always suspicious whenever we have this notion of like progress or like a telos towards something, right? Yeah. Yes.
In fact, just to follow what you're saying, what really changed from the Catholicism or not was the label, if you belong to my institution, to my church, life is one. But if you can be defined as savage, like all the Mesoamerican people were, you can be destroyed and killed.
Yes, of course.
A lot of easiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you're a group of the other, you know, these rules don't apply to you in the same way they do as they do to either the chosen people or the colonists that are coming to the Americas and displacing Amerindians officially in the name of the church, which legally could be done up to 20 kilometers from the coast just by reading a document. If a land was not Christianized, this was enough to make the entire region fair game. So again, there I think I could say, well, maybe a little bit of healthy skepticism is good on that way. But the gentleman does make a good point that institutionally, these practices were slowly, but eventually pushed out, at least in their very codified forms, right? Also, I mean, it's a lot more difficult when we talk about Mesoamerica because we have a lot less sources, right? Of course, with all the great book burnings and all that, we don't know. Was there a Mayan Socrates? Almost surely, but we'll never know, right? So all societies undergo evolution and change and change over time, and also influence each other because we have all these different Mesoamerican groups influencing each other. There historically has been a lot more emphasis on the role that the people from central Mexico played in the south and then into Central America, and a lot less about how much cultures like the Maya and the Zapotec influenced the Nahua-speaking peoples of the north. But that is changing a good deal. If you go to Cacatzla in the state of Tlaxcala, just a couple hours away from Mexico City, you see those murals, and man, those are Maya murals, right? How that happened, I don't know. Maybe it was just a princess got married off and wants to take a piece of home with her, or maybe a lord is visiting the Usumacinta and says, give me 5 of your guys, this is really nice. I want this at home. So there is a lot of this communication back and forth. But yes, the archaeological record does seem to suggest that of the Mesoamerican people, it was the Mexica that were most involved in human sacrifice. And also the other aspect of this has to do with ritual bloodletting, right? And this is something that's pretty well known. But for example, if we see the stelae from Yaxchilan, or did I not do that slide? Or these, just past it? Okay, or the murals here in Bonampak, we see this practice of passing a rope, right? With what's the word I'm looking for? Like with spines through one's tongue. Here in Bonampak, we see women doing this, and this is in the 3rd chamber, the one where they're celebrating the victory over I think it's Piedras Negras. But in the case of men, they would do this as well, and also they would do it through their foreskin, which is even worse. Either way, it's not fun. But here the important thing to take into consideration is that these are not, normal people doing this, right? These are the nobles, because it is the blood of the nobles which actually has, the power to it, right? It would not do much good to just have, rando people doing this. Yes?
Along those lines of the letting of blood go, I remember in Tepeyac, the region of Mexico City where Guadalupe is,
Mm-hmm.
Our first visit there many years ago, peasant women would go on their knees such a long distance that the blood would be literally dripping from them and on their clothing, and finally arrive into the cathedral to observe the tilma.
That's
So
right.
It was still, you remember, I think they changed some rules, so they can't go the great distance they used to. Do you know what I'm talking about?
You're allowed to go to the distances, but Mexico City Health Authority doesn't want big stains of blood from tens of thousands of people on a festive day. But definitely people do undergo extreme agony for their faith. We see this at different churches in Rome, where you're also, supposed to go up only on your knees. In Islam, there's similar practices. The Sikhs have similar practices. So this central idea that we got back at the beginning, right, at the very beginning here, is if you want something big and you want something important from the divine, you better be willing to give something proportionally important to him or they, right? So, yeah, and that is rational. If you do believe in God or gods and believe that they hold the power to either have you lose a war and have your lives and that of your families destroyed, or they can intercede and sacrifice will do it, well then that's a completely rational move. Yes?
Well, it seems to me too that every war we've ever had, we send our soldiers off to be sacrificed. War.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I think that under very, especially under very specific circumstances, I think could be considered a form of human sacrifice, especially when the war is clearly ideologically driven. So when we think of, for example, the Vietnam War, right? I mean, all these men and women, of course, on the other side that died because of a Red Scare in the United States and the fear that, countries would be dropping like dominoes in Asia over to the communist sphere if they didn't just throw bodies at them. So interpreted in that sense, yes, absolutely. War itself is a form of sacrifice, and we got a lot of that in the classical authors as well, like Homer and the guy from the Works and Days, Theogony Hesiod. That's also a very good point. Yes.
Just a very unprofessional opinion. It seems to me that all that we see here, it does have a common source, and the source is fear. Fear that we won't win the war, fear that the gods will be mad at us, fear that the crops won't come in. And so when we have this overwhelming fear, it's the worst emotion there is. So, like you said, big problem, big solution. And so what more could we offer than our life to subjugate this fear? And so then we can go into any other violent or negative thing that people are still doing today at this very moment. And we could say that this is what drives it. And why is it present in all ages and in all societies and in all regions? It's because we're all human. We have that same fear of bad things happening and that same desire to want to cut it off. That's mine.
No, I mean, that's the, okay, sorry, I think the batteries here ran out, which is maybe Providence's way of telling you to shut up. But yes, and I was told that sex and violence sells, and I wasn't about to do a striptease, so this is the best I could come up with for today's topic. But it is a very interesting topic and something kind of off the beaten path of my usual area of research, but because it is something that people ask me so much about when it comes to visiting archaeological sites and talking about these pre-Hispanic cultures, I think it was a point worth addressing. Sorry? Sure. Okay. Are there any more questions?
It's not really a question, but I'm positive when you mentioned that there are reasons for these things, and you said good reasons, and why there should be a better reason. I don't think the reason is in any way good or bad. There's a reason based on beliefs or justification of what you believe, but you cannot qualify a reason as being good or bad.
Right. I mean, I don't mean to make a value statement. What I just mean to emphasize is that it is rational. It is a rational decision. Now, is it a good decision? Like, that's an entirely different question, right? But it's just to say that it's not a bunch of savages cutting their heads off and taking out each other's hearts willy-nilly for no good reason. And also, we were just talking about Mesoamerica and the ancient Near East, but basically any culture we go to, we are going to see instances of some form of sacrifice. It's especially interesting when we look at ancient Judea, right? Before monotheism really became the norm, and we had the chief god El Gabal, and then all his lower gods, including Yahweh, who was, the god of the mountain. Thank you. Gracias. Okay.
Hello, okay, yeah. So, sorry, so during that period, we know that human sacrifice played a very large role. And we can say, yes, that was pre, Abrahamic, but it is something that is still very much glossed over. I always return back to that very curiously worded, first commandment, no other gods but I, right? So there are other gods.
But during the century, that changed from human to animal sacrifice. And remember the Greeks, the Roman, the Turks, in
Anatolia. Mhm.
Not only that, they tried to divinate the future or any event by reading the entrail.
Yeah, I mean it's a associated but different phenomena, of course, and the Greeks did practice human sacrifice. I mean, it was not again super common, and it's not something that comes up a lot in the sources, but it was practiced both symbolically and literally, and it goes all the way back to again authors like Hesiod and his works and days. So yeah. Yes.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the fundamental founding event of Christianity.
Yes, the crucifixion. Yes, I did mention it in passing. Yes, I'm trying to not get too controversial here and expose my beliefs. But yes, of course, that is an enormous sacrifice, and if you are a Christian and you take that worldview seriously, then yeah, that's a very big deal. So then that allows us to el chivo expiatorio. What's the scapegoat, right? The great scapegoat for our sins. So yeah. And I mean, and of course, we saw the similar idea in this kind of symbolic apotheosis in Mexica culture of making a man a god and then sacrificing him. Though, of course, that's much more symbolic, because even though they treated it like it was real, well, of course, it isn't really. You can't transform the temporal to the eternal just by feeding somebody really well for a year. Okay, so if there's no more questions, have a lovely evening, and please make sure to buy a magazine on your way out. Thank you.